Howdy, and welcome to Brandy's Book Stack. Today, we'll be talking about the books that I read from October through December. So without further ado, let's jump into the stacks. So starting with October, unfortunately, I read a big, fat 0. And I know a lot of booktubers feel like they have a responsibility to read hundreds of books and to have more and more content. Here at Brandy's Book Stack, we don't do that. We believe that you should read things that you enjoy, and even if it's something that's a little more time consuming, then we should take our time. And that it's okay to normalize not having to read 100 books a year. So, while I didn't read anything in October, I did take a lot of mental health breaks, and I enjoyed doing some puzzles, and it was a good time for me. So I don't regret not reading anything in the month of October. In the month of December, I did read Sophie's World by Jostein Gaarder. I hope I'm saying that right. First of all, I want to talk about the book itself because I think this is really neat. I bought this book secondhand, as I do most of my books, and was able to find it at a very good deal. I think I paid $3 for it. But what makes this especially neat is when I was going through the book and reading through the first few pages, I discovered that it was actually signed by the author, which is especially neat because I really enjoyed this book a lot. Trying to describe the book, on the other hand, is really hard to do without giving away major plot elements. This book is a combination of philosophy textbook and a magical realism fantasy fairy tale. Yeah, I know that sounds weird. It is weird, but it's really, really good. And it's not like anything else I've ever read. And I love books that do that give me an opportunity to read something different. So in this novel, we follow a young girl, and she is being taught philosophy by this mysterious man. And before that creeps you out, I promise by the end it's less creepy, okay? That was maybe the one thing that kind of took me out of the story a little bit, is a young girl shouldn't be having conversations in secret with a middle-aged man, but it's okay by the end. And the philosophy section in this book and Sophie's exposure to philosophy is explained. If you've ever read Bill Bryson and you're familiar with his conversational, friendly sort of style, it's very similar. The major thinkers of philosophy are outlined to you in a very common sense, practical way where you can understand their philosophies. And he goes in a course from the beginning of the history of philosophy into the current time. And that's done very, very well. If that sounds boring to you, okay, maybe that part of the book might not be so exciting. Although I thought it was well done and interesting. But you also get the other half, which is that magical realism fairy tale I was talking about. And I can't really talk much about that, like I said, without ruining the plot. But what I will say about this book is in the beginning, it starts very entrenched in reality. Everything has a logical, rational basis. And as the philosophers that we're talking about kind of have more experimental and different ways of thought, so too does the character Sophie experience sort of some wild and different things occurring in her life. And it becomes more and more separated from our reality as it goes on. It becomes more magical, more fantastical throughout the book until the end. It's completely sort of divorced from reality. And especially since a lot of philosophy is focused on the nature of reality itself, it really explores that theme quite well, both through the straightforward philosophical discussion and also in the magical fairy tale story. So nothing I've ever read, but definitely worth reading. I would give this a 5 out of 5 stars. Great book. The next book I read on my Kindle, and that is, and I say book, really it was a short story, and that is The Kidnapping of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. You might know him from Wizard of Oz fame. And I first read several years ago The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. And it's a different take on the Santa Claus mythology than I had read before, and I really loved it. And this little short story is kind of a continuation of that and was also very charming. Around the Christmas season, if you'd like to read something that's fun and cozy and charming with kind of a fantastical bent, definitely check those stories out. They are public domain. They're available on Gutenberg.org, so go and check those out. They're worth seeing. So the next thing that I read was I read those two in November, and then in December I started with An Irish Country Village. This is the second book in the Irish Country Doctor series by Patrick Taylor. If you didn't watch my previous video, where I covered July through September books, this was one of them, and I loved The Irish Country Doctor, and as a follow-up, I think this was stellar. It was just almost as good as the original. And again, we're following Dr. Barry Laverty as he becomes more and more entrenched in the village of Ballybuckle and his relationship with the ornery, rascally Dr. O'Reilly. And he is becoming closer and closer to the crusty old doctor as he learns more and more about his care and compassion for his community. And he comes to love the village more and more and its inhabitants, and comes to care for them. And there's a romance that's in this novel that's pretty well done. And yeah, the great thing about these novels is they are cozy without being too schmaltzy, being too, Deus Ex Machina, where everything is just fairy wand, magical and wonderful. It has a little bit of that, like all kind of cozy fiction does, but this really does a good job of not going too far in that direction. There is some real pain and some real heartache in this book that came from real life events that you could still experience today. So, but yet at the end, it's an uplifting, happy, joyful book to read. So highly recommend Patrick Taylor, An Irish Country Village, 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read a fairly famous book, and that is The Letters from Father Christmas by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, I'm a huge Tolkien fan, and I'm surprised I've never asked for this book for Christmas before my birthday's in December. And I think that the thing that stopped me is I kind of figured it would be mainly kind of a coffee table book, artsy, but not much to it, maybe a few pictures and letters to kids, and it might be kind of boring. Wrong. This is Tolkien. How could I not have trusted him? Tolkien tells a story in his letters. It's not just, oh, Father Christmas is coming to see you. And it is artsy and beautiful as well. And I'll show an example of some of the pages. Like here's his little drawing of Santa Claus. So cute. But he tells a story that's ongoing throughout Christmases over the years with his children. And he creates characters. He creates a character of a polar bear that is one of the inhabitants at the North Pole. And there's gnomes. There's the polar bear. You can see. There's some gnomes at the North Pole. And like I said, the art even on the letters is really beautiful. And it covers a pretty broad time frame. But reading them all together just read like a charming story. So there was so much more to it than just an art book, a coffee table book. So if you were kind of wondering about that as well, I would say it's worth buying. So this covers a time frame from 1920 until 1943. in the lives of his children, sending a letter to his kids every year as a letter from Father Christmas. And, it covers sort of that war era, which is interesting as well. And Santa talks about, how there's bad people who are keeping him from being able to get to all the kids he wants to, and just so beautifully written. And you can feel the love that Tolkien had for his kids in this book, which was charming and wonderful as well. So if you're looking for a cozy read around Christmas, you couldn't do better than Letters from Father Christmas by J.R.R. Tolkien. Okay, the next book I read was One Christmas by Truman Capote. And it's got the slipcase that has this lovely little thin volume inside. I say it's a book. It's really more like a long short story, and you can see the type is fairly large and the margins are huge. But if you've not read any of Truman Capote's holiday fiction or sort of nonfiction, I think that it's a shame that we don't have more from Capote writing from this Southern perspective. Capote did grow up in the South, and the Christmas stories and the Thanksgiving story he wrote were set in that time frame, and I really feel like that was the center of his character. Most commonly, Capote's associated with New York, but he writes so beautifully and so sentimentally about his childhood in the South that I think it's sad that he didn't focus on that more in his fiction. So One Christmas is, and it's not uncomplicated, his Christmas and Thanksgiving stories. In this one, for example, we follow a young boy who has divorced parents who have left him with relatives. Both of them have left him with relatives one of whom an older woman that he grows very close to. And this story takes place where he is taken from the comfort of the home that he knows with his aunts and uncles to go live with his father through the Christmas holidays. And his father's house is portrayed, of course, it's in this city. I believe it's in New York. It's portrayed as very cold, very heartless, very without love. And even though his father provides him with every material joy, his desire is still with what he considers to be his home. And there's a lot of that, our family is who we pick, not who maybe we were assigned at birth. And it's really, really beautiful. And the writing is just stunning. It's stunning. I can't think of any other way to describe it. It's some of the most beautiful prose I've ever written. And I'm sad that we don't have more in this vein from Capote. So definitely, if you get an opportunity, check out One Christmas. It's incredible. So the next thing that I read was A Christmas Mystery by Anne Perry. Anne Perry's kind of known for writing a series of Christmas mysteries. This one is A Christmas Promise, and it ties into the Pitt series, if you're familiar with that. And it's the protagonists are two young girls, one very young, whose uncle had been murdered, and who is searching to find out what happened to his donkey and his things. He was a ragman that sold rags throughout the streets of Victorian London. And it's about another young girl who befriends her when she is alone and beside herself with grief, and how they develop a friendship and go on a search to solve this mystery. And This one is kind of crossing the line into schmaltz a little bit. It is not my favorite of the Christmas novels that Anne Perry read. It wasn't horrible by any stretch of the imagination. It's just kind of middle of the road, like a 3-star for me. And I think that there's better Christmas novels. I read A Christmas Garland a year or two ago, and I think it was a much better book if you wanted to pick a Christmas mystery. But this one's not terribly bad. It just was kind of middle of the road. So that's that. And then the next book that I read was Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Now, when I was a child, I loved Laura Ingalls Wilder. I was obsessed with her novels about life on the prairie. And since then, as an adult, I've heard a lot of criticism of Laura Ingalls Wilder, particularly for her portrayal of Native Americans. And I wanted to see if I felt her stories held up now that I'm an adult. And I went into Half Price Books, and they had this beautiful edition with the gold leaf edges. And I just felt like I had to purchase this because how could I not? It's so beautiful. And I've been wanting to read the Little House on the Prairie series again anyway, so I got that, and I read what was always my favorite as a child, which was The Little House in the Big Woods. I love the stories of just daily life in the prairies, in the American West, as it were. This actually starts, I think it's in Michigan. I think that's right. In the woods there. The Little House in the Big Wood occurs before they move across the prairie. So, and I was looking to see if it says, I can't find it. I think it was Michigan though. And I did feel like it did hold up. I did feel like all the descriptions were charming. In this particular first novel, there was no negative discussion on Native Americans at all. There was one reference to African Americans as darky, and that was in a song that was commonly sung at the time, which I'm sure there's people that have negative feelings towards that, and I respect that. I did not feel like it detracted that much because, again, that would have been a song that would have been sung at the time. But I did love this story, like I did before. I love the story of how they ate and how they had to mend their clothes and just how life was so different, not from a historical perspective all that long ago. And it's a very conversational tone. It kind of reminds you of your grandparents telling you about their life back in the day. And it's charming today as it was when I read it as a child. So I'll definitely be reading more in the Little House on the Prairie series in the future, and I'll let you know what I think. So the next and last book that we're going to talk about is another Truman Capote, and this is Summer Crossing. Unfortunately, I did not care for this anywhere near as much as his holiday fiction. This is Truman Capote's first novel, I believe it is. It was a novel found after his death and published posthumously. And it feels like a first novel. It feels like something that wasn't ready to be published. There are flashes of Capote's brilliance in this novel. There are some sections that are just so breathtakingly written. And then there's some that you're like, oh, you could have done better there. So the plot in this novel, we're following a young woman who is wealthy and kind of a rebel, and she has fallen in love with a young man from the wrong side of the tracks, kind of a trite type of story, and there ends up with disastrous consequences. And it is not a happy book. It does not have a happy ending. So if you're looking for that, seek elsewhere. I will not be keeping this. I will be unhauling it. I gave it 2 stars because there is, some of Capote's brilliance, but there were some problems. There is racial slur in this book, which I did not enjoy. There is a unaliving in this book that was not, I didn't feel like it helped the plot. I didn't feel good about that part of it. Not that I ever do, but it was particularly bad, I thought. I felt like the novel ended too abruptly. It wasn't fully developed. The characters were not likable, and I don't always have to like the characters, but I didn't really see any character growth in either of the major characters. Just in general, it just wasn't great for me. Now, what I will say is great is this cover. I think this cover is money. The beautiful socialite at the top, the large crowd of people, the view of New York, the man and the woman kind of in that Bogart-esque kind of photograph. Just a beautiful, you can see what this book's going to be about by looking at the cover, and it's just, I think it's great. But unfortunately, the inside just didn't do that cover justice, so I will probably be returning that. So that's what I read in the months of October through December. Please give me a line about what you've been reading. Have you read any of the books I have? Please leave a comment below. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Thanks. Bye.